2021.
Just got this. This is the Terra Nova Nurseries site, and Terra Nova is one of the sites that really produces, I think, some of the best plant material that's out there, and some of the newer stuff. But they don't sell anything to us in the public. They sell wholesale products to the industry. So they will sell, and it's actually not even to the retail. These guys will sell these cuttings and these plants to the wholesalers, the people who actually grow the plants that they sell to the retail nurseries. So I'm just going to run through a few of these because it's just so cool. And some of the ones I wanted to touch on, some of these hellebores down here. But these are some, and I often will spotlight some of these ones each year in the springtime, so with this, in this website, I kind of like it. It's terranovanurseries.com. And this is just really great information about sort of how big the plants grow. This particular one is an enemy satin doll blush, it's called. And so this is just a really nice short plant. You can see, you can hover over top of this picture and see sort of what it looks like up close. So anemones are predominantly fall blooming, so they tend to get going late in the season. So it says one of the earliest blooming with extended bloom period. So it blooms earlier than some of the other ones. And you can see here bloom times, it says July, August, September, October. Well, there you go. So most of these fall blooming anemones, they mostly bloom in sort of probably about halfway through August through until the end of October. And many of them are quite tall too. And this thing looks like it's quite low. So nine, yeah, so the height only 9 inches. Well, boy, that would be pretty tiny if you could. I think this could be a really good plant to get, just because I really like short plants because you don't have to do much with them. You just enjoy them. They just flower like crazy, and you can use those in the foreground in your plantings and get, finding taller plants or big plants is easy. It's harder to find these dwarfer, more compact varieties that are really ultimately lower care, easier to manage. And this one's not only smaller and lower care, but it's also blooming as early as July. So we don't know, depending what climate you're in, what that means. July, is that July 1st or July 30th? Hard to say. But what we'll do is we'll just have a look at some of these pictures, and you can see what this is. If anybody's familiar with these used to be, I think they were Anemone hupaensis. And so they used to be Anemone japonica, but I don't know. I think the names have changed a little bit over the years. But anyway, typical of these are the fall blooming ones. There's many anemones that bloom even really in the spring. Many of you might know Anemone blanda. Anemone blanda starts really early. It's one of the first things to shoot out of the ground in the spring. It's a little bulb, and it just produces this beautiful little flower, and they're just gorgeous for mass plantings, typically only in white or blue. Then there's a whole series of other anemones that bloom at different times through the season, and this is in the fall blooming category. Now, these are awesome for woodland gardens too, for really natural looking landscapes, and even just the standard ones, which there's quite a few older varieties of these that are quite tall. They're maybe up into that sort of 3 to 4 foot height, and really nice. I just love them. I think they're one of the nicer plants, and hardy as nails. They survive the cold and tough conditions. The deer do eat them, so you can't really have them in total woodland areas where you have a lot of deer. But I don't know. Sometimes it's worth a try. Maybe they'll miss out on it and won't eat it. But what we'll do here is we'll just go back and we'll look at a nice begonia here. So this is one that is new for 2021. And this one is called New Year's Eve. And you can see the foliage or the flowers on this thing. So this is really an annual. It's perennial. I guess we classify these as what's called tender perennial. So tender perennials are plants that are perennial where they come from, so in subtropical areas, and they live from year to year. But when we move into the temperate climate, like where we live here, then they will just die off as soon as they get close to freezing. I don't even think these will hit freezing, probably about 4 or 5 degrees, and they're starting to die off. But this is such a beautiful plant because it produces masses of blooms and it produces these really cool sort of maple leaf shaped leaves, which I really like. But again, these are grown for planters or containers. You know, I just love to have one of these sitting on the patio. Like that'd be great, just all by itself in a pot, or maybe with like some Nepeta, the straight down, you know, hanging Nepeta just hanging off the bottom or around the perimeter of that. I think it'd be pretty cool. So, you know, I just think it's a beautiful plant. I can't wait to get one. I sure hope we can get some, you know, because again, these plants are new for this year, so they're just being sent out to the growers who then grow them and then send them to the garden centers. Because often I'll mention these new plants and people ask like, "Whoa, I can't seem to find them anywhere." It's like, yeah, well, I sure hope we can get them. One thing that's helpful is if you do keep asking your garden centers, and this is one I would ask for is begonia. It's the holiday series, and that's trademarked by Terra Nova. New Year's Eve. I guess it looks like fireworks, right? So what a cool plant. All right, so we're gonna just have a quick look at this. This was my perennial of the week. I think last video, episode 2, I think it was, of this year, and yeah, pretty cool plant. These Brenneras are really a very colorful foliage, and these ones that are just like almost as pure white like that, it's just a beautiful thing. They're very silvery in the landscape. And the flowers are, here's a picture of the flowers. You can see this one's just starting to bloom. And they send up all these shoots sort of after they leaf out in the spring. And they're quite early blooming, but they get these tiny little blue flowers, but they really become quite a mass, so that it's just like the whole thing is a cloud of these beautiful little blue flowers. So I'll often take these Brunneras and plant them with like bleeding hearts, for example. And in the springtime, when these are blooming, the bleeding hearts are just brand new and they're just producing those beautiful little flowers that are just new. A nice rich pink color with this blue works just great. So nice combination. And then in the summertime, after they're done blooming, sometimes I'll just cut the whole plant right down to the ground, and then it'll produce all a bunch of new leaves for the summer. And when you're growing plants for leaves, you know, you want those leaves to be big and really nice. Well, then you feed them a little bit extra, right? So plants grown for foliage, you need to feed them more. And if you give them a little bit more nitrogen particularly, so that's the first number on your fertilizer list. So 15, 30, 15 is 15% nitrogen. It's the first number. Nitrogen will always give you really good foliage, and not so good for flowering, but it's really good for foliage. So these plants, after they bloom, go ahead, give them a shot, and good to go. So there you go. That's the Brunnera Alexandria, and it's a good one. Gonna just move on here. Well, there's a whole bunch of coleus, and you know, I really don't want to get into that too much today, but you know, I kind of like this one. I thought this was one of my favorites. It's a series is Nova, so Coleus Nova series. This one they call roly poly, and I guess it's because of its shape, you know, that it grows in such a tight mass, a tight ball. But I really like I like these brightly colored ones. You know, when you put coleus in planters with other annuals, the coleus steal the show every time. Like there's nothing can compete with the color of these things. And they're good in full sun or part sun. Pretty good in shade too. In the older varieties of the coleus, they were pretty much had to be grown in the shade. They were kind of shadier, shade-loving plants. But now they're kind of moving right into that full sun category. You can see here they listed as part shade to full shade. But you know what? I've grown mine in full sun, and I've had just amazing success. Again, blowing everything out of the planters as far as color goes, and you can see it from a long ways away. So pretty cool. So this one, you know, having a size on these is irrelevant because it's an annual and because you can cut them back. You know, we were talking about pruning of trees and shrubs and that sort of thing, but these are annuals. And I would just say that what I do is just plant them in and let them do what they want. One of the keys to planting annuals is not going with too small of a pot. go with big pots, and then you can have dimension. You can have like a bigger leafed plant and a medium, smaller leaf plant and some cascading plants. Like if you want to have a variety in a planter, make sure the planter is big. Bigger it is, the easier it is to get that good, variety and selection. Or even if you want to just develop a really nice like arrangement that looks beautiful. Super hard to do in a small pot, because just any one of the plants in like a little 8-inch or 10-inch pot, any one of those could fill that pot till it's just overflowing. And then, by that time, hey, it's July. Well, you're right in the premium season, and these things are drying out every, 2, 3, 4 times a day, because they're just overgrowing their container. So that's a big tip for me when it comes to planters, is go big. Make sure you got a reasonable amount of soil for moisture holding, so that you can make it through a day. I'm broadcasting from the sunny Okanagan, and I'll tell you, even the bigger planters, we have to water 2 or 3 times a day because of the heat in the summertime. But, it's just one of these things you got to help some way. And the smaller the pot you have for anything that's out in that heat, well, you're going to have to water every hour on the hour, try to keep some of those things alive. So anyway, that's going to be the basics of that for today. And again, I really like the Terra Nova group. I also like the Proven Winners group, and I'm going to be highlighting some of those, because the Proven Winners Plant of the Year, I think I might even have it up on here. Oh yeah, now this is I can't even blow up these pictures big enough so you can see them, but this is the Plant of the Year for the Perennial Plant Association. So 2021 Perennial Plant Association Plant of the Year. And this is the Calamintha nipida subspecies, SSP, that means subspecies, nipida. So it sounds like to me it's a nipida, but apparently it's a calamintha. So this is just a very tiny white flowered plant. It just gets masses or clouds and clouds of these tiny white flowers. And so this will be super good for pollinators, and particularly for the little beneficial wasps. They're always looking for tiny white flowers, because they'll take the nectar from those, and then they immediately head over and start killing off all your aphids. So they don't eat the aphids, well, the larvae do. So they lay their eggs wherever the aphids are. So I wish I could blow this up a little bit better for you, but I can't on this particular site. But again, this is through the Perennial Plant Association of the Year. This particular site is Walter's Gardens. And so we're just going to zip over here. And this particular plant is the what they call the cat's pajamas, which is the new perennial plant of the year for Proven Winners. And of course, a lot of us gardeners love the Proven Winner plants. They're really good. But you can see that this, anybody who's grown the nipida group, there's a ton of different nipidas. But the thing I find is they get way too big and they're way too vigorous. So they get to be 3 to 4 feet across, 2 to 3 feet high. Like, it's crazy, some of the varieties, and they just bloom literally from the beginning of, probably the beginning of June. They're starting to bloom, and they go right through till frost, and they're deer resistant and drought tolerant, and man, they're just such a great plant. I prefer to cut them back, right at the beginning of July. But this one is interesting, because this one actually blooms earlier than all of those by about 3 weeks. So that puts this one somewhere in about middle of May, or maybe even earlier. That's why I have to try it. I have a hard time, I'll follow what people say about plants, but I prefer to grow them myself, and then I can give really honest opinions about how they grow. But what I like about this so far is they say 3 weeks earlier than the other ones. So that means it could be blooming like mid-May right till frost. Unbelievable. Nice, low, compact habit. So for those people out there, and a lot of landscapers, they like to mass plant these things because they're so sturdy. But the problem is most of them get way too big, and then you have to go in and cut them back, and it's just a battle. So I really appreciate these plants that stay compact and are easier to manage. So let's keep our fingers crossed on this one. Let's hope it's available, and let's hope we can check this one out this year. All righty, there we go. It's right from the Proven Winners site. All righty. Well, we're going to just switch back here, and with those couple of notes, we didn't talk much about the hellebores, but there are a lot of really great hellebores, and every year they're introducing more and more varieties. And for people who are not familiar with hellebores, they're the earliest blooming. And I'll put some pictures up here of my own varieties, some that I have growing, and maybe even another one of those Terra Nova ones. But really, really nice plants. They're predominantly spring blooming. They can be starting anywhere, like on a year like this, they want to be starting next week. So unfortunately, when it's this mild, that they're going to be up really early, and then they're going to get frozen, and they're going to have some problems, right? They're quite frost resistant, but they can't handle like a -10. So if I have them in my garden and it's super warm like this and I can see them budding, I'm going to grab a cardboard box and maybe put some insulation in it or something, and put it over top of these plants, and protect them as soon as I see any sign of cold weather coming, because I really want to protect them, make sure they're okay. On a normal year, they would be shooting up like that, showing the buds and the color starting at beginning of March, or even about halfway through March, they're actually starting to bloom. So I love that early color, and they'll bloom right through and show at least some interest right till about the end of May. So that's pretty good, for spring effect. They're pretty hard to beat. They're one of the best. And these are actually the Hellebores orientalis, and those are the ones that are the showiest ones. And now they're coming out with just a huge selection of singles and doubles, and a real wide selection. So you want to check out those, and I find they're pretty good. They survive drought pretty well. They're deer resistant, so that's another big win. Deer will not eat those hellebores. They are very, very colorful, plant collection type plant. I used to have a bunch of them, and the one year when we had that really mild weather, just like this year, and then it got really cold. And then when it got really cold, it went to like -20, and I lost about half of them. So I felt a little depressed about that. Didn't really know what to do. I added, I think, a couple more, but I want to add one or two every year. And I've got a little concrete wall that I have in my backyard, and I like to put them along the top of the wall, just because they're a short plant, and their flowers tend to nod. They kind of point downwards. So with that in mind, I love to get the hellebores up on that top of that wall. It seems to be the best way, and I can just walk right up there and enjoy them right at eye level. It's fabulous. So I don't have to bend over and get stuck bent over. Anyway, that's going to be it for this segment of the show. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the bugs that are coming up, and particularly the borer insects. So we'll continue on with that in just a flash. All righty, we're going to just move on here to the borer category. Each week I like to talk a little bit about the different types of insects that we come across, and sort of the good and the bad. And this is one of the worst ones that we'll ever come across, are the borer insects, because borer insects actually kill trees. They are the ones that actually cause the death of trees. They get many of them get into live trees. Some of them get into dead trees, which is less of an issue, because they just help to speed up the decomposition of them, more or less. So we kind of have to watch for that a little bit. But with dead trees, there's nothing you can do. I just don't like leaving a lot of dead trees laying around, because then sometimes those dead trees will actually tend to attract some types of borers that are actually looking for other trees to attack, like living trees. So some of the borers that are common that we'll come across that are fairly very common in the case of the pine beetles. Pine beetles are a borer insect. They're a small beetle. This picture in the middle here shows one of the pine beetle group. There's several different species of pine beetles, and the worst one, I think, is there's the western pine beetle and the mountain pine beetle. It's the mountain pine beetle that's the worst one, because it flies longer distances. And this one actually, to me, looks like a turpentine beetle. So turpentine beetles have a little bit more of that reddish color to them. At least the red ones do. And but same idea, quite small, often between that 1/8 of an inch and 3/8 of an inch in length. Very small, and they come by the thousands into trees and they eat the cambium layer under the bark and cause the death of a tree. So it's really wise to just be knowledgeable about these borers and know that they exist. Like all the aphids and the leafhoppers and the spider mites and all the other pests that we have, they're just kind of, they're not really major issues. They're just minor issues, really. They generally don't kill the tree. Even caterpillars don't kill trees. They'll eat some leaves, but hopefully they don't defoliate them to the point where the tree actually dies, which is possible, but it's not common. But as temperatures increase with the global warming and whatnot, and we are experiencing that every year, warmer, warmer, warmer. I mean, just look out the window. There's no winter out there to be seen. But the borer insects, they multiply faster and faster and faster as the temperatures increase. And even just, 1 degree or a half a degree can make all the difference in making sure that they're going to survive. And they often say that, if you want to kill off the pine beetles, you need minus 28 degrees temperature every day for about, I think it's about 3 weeks in order to kill the population down. So, we're not even coming close to that. I don't even think they're getting close to that up north. Like, temperatures are warm. But anyway, nothing we can do about that. We just have to make sure that people are aware of these things. So real quick on these types, this is a group here. I call them sort of the longhorn beetles because they have these long antennas, and there are a couple called the longhorn beetles. They're really bad. Some of them, the particular one, like with this one here that has this dashed white and black marks on the antenna, are really particularly bad because they attack the live trees. Some of these will attract dead trees, and their larvae down here, you'll see them. Some of them are only maybe a half an inch long, some of them an inch long or so. And I often call them woodworms. When we were kids, we used to use these for fishing bait, especially in the winter months. And these things just keep on chomping all winter long until it gets really cold. They just slow down to a stop. And then when it warms up a bit, they just keep on chomping. So they're often, a lot of these will be actually woodworms that eat the wood parts. And but the really bad ones are the bark beetles, and the ones that get right under the bark. And they're usually the smaller species, and they'll creep along. You often peel a piece of bark off a piece of firewood or something, and you see the little trails in there, and that's from a type of borer insect. If they're tiny, it could be a pine beetle if it's a pine tree, but also Douglas fir bark beetles, really bad. So, again, not much we can do. I think just awareness is helpful. So here's another group of beetles that again, they produce these, different types of grubs, different sizes. It's sort of the smaller versions and the larger versions. And this particular one here is a metallic beetle, and I don't have too many pictures of it, but it's kind of silvery, and it flashes all different colors on it, and when the sun's shining on it. And they come in all different sizes. There's quite large ones that are sometimes up to 2 inches long or even a bit more. But most of them are in that 1 inch sort of range. And the one that's in this group that's particularly bad is the poplar borer. And this is a grub. The beetle comes in and it chews into the bark a bit, and it lays some eggs in there, and the eggs hatch. And these larvae take off and start to mine underneath the bark and kills a tree ultimately. So this one is a bad one. So that makes it really hard for me to actually plant anything that's a willow or a poplar. The pussy willows are quite popular, but I really don't plant them because these borers are everywhere and they just get in and kill them. It's just a matter of time. So it's a tough one, very tough. There's a lot of these really beautiful plants that we would like to plant. I think we just have to think twice before we go ahead with that. It's just like a birch tree, bronze birch borer. You can see this is an emerald borer up here, and it looks quite big, but it's very tiny. It's only about a half an inch long, this one. But I had this only picture I could find really that sort of shows it, but very tiny and this really metallic green color. And this emerald borer gets into ash trees, and it's more of a Eastern Canada thing. Down east, the Fraxinus group, the ash group, all the Fraxinus trees down there are just dying like crazy. So it's really a tough one. Not much you can do. They are trying all different types of treatments. They're always trying to find a biological treatment, so another organism or something that'll attack and kill them. Because the ash trees are one of the best trees for street trees, and they're just a great tree. And unfortunately, it's hard to plant them down east now because of this insect. So I'm hoping they're making some strides on that. I'd like to get updated on the latest information on the emerald ash borer, and hopefully that thing is knocked out. But if you took this same borer and turned it a little bit more bronzy color, then you'd be pretty much looking at the bronze birch borer, and it's about the same size. It's just about maybe a bit longer than a half an inch or so. And they get into the birch trees, and you see the whole tops of the trees dying back and branches broken and hanging. And if you cut off a branch on the inside, you'll see the tunnels inside the wood of the tree. And so I'm sure they're very closely related. And again, just really annoying. Birch trees used to be one of my favorite trees. I'm talking back in the early 90s and late 80s. We were still planting them in those days, but we haven't really been able to plant them because, you plant them and within 5 or 10 years, they're all infested with the borers, the bronze birch borer, and they're all starting to die. So, a tree is a long-term investment. You really got to think of these things before you plant. And, you keep your fingers crossed, but man, they're hard to keep away. The only thing I'll say about birch trees is that if you want to, if you understand a little bit more about bronze birch borers, is that they fly right around the end of May and into early June. And that's the time when they're out there looking for trees. So if you prune your birch trees in the springtime, when you make a cut, you smell that cut. It smells really nice. It smells like a birch tree. But that fresh cut also is emitting ethylene gas, and ethylene gas tends to attract a lot of bad insects, particularly the borer insects. So pruning a birch tree in the springtime, that's the main reason I don't prune birches in the spring, is because of the bronze birch borer, because it'll just attract them. So best thing is leave your pruning on birch trees to the summer, keep it into the end of July sort of timing, and end of July, early August, and you're good to go. So I think this awareness that these are the bad insects of the world. There are all these borer insects. And so just being aware whenever you do see insects, I hate to kill insects because it's hard to even find insects these days. Like their populations are definitely dwindling all the way around. But often these insects that are the bad ones are sometimes the ones that are proliferating. Like the birch or the pine beetles are really, really bad. The turpentine beetles are the ones that you'll see, they burrow right at the base of the pine tree, and they make those big tunnels of sap that you'll see, and then you'll see the sap sort of oozing out, and they call it pitching out. And they're trying to get rid of that grub, or sometimes it's the adult beetles trying to, it's in there as a grub, and then it metamorphosizes, turns into a beetle, and then it's trying to get out. And of course the tree wants it out too, so it's pitching it out. Big blob of pitch on the side of the tree, but it's always right down within about a foot of the ground. That's turpentine beetle. When you find it up higher, like at head height, or sometimes up to about 10 feet, that's typically the pine beetles. So anyway, there's a lot of them out there. Let's just be aware. That's where I have a hard time planting certain types of pines. Like Austrian pine is a pretty common tree. It's one of the better ones. As far as I've seen, it hasn't really been bothered too much by the pine beetles, but it is bothered by turpentine beetles. And so, but again, turpentine beetles, much slower acting, and you only get the occasional one here or there. Pine beetles will take out a whole area of pines, and the mountain pine beetle is the worst one. And it's even sometimes been found in spruce trees. So it's tough. And they're out there, be aware of it. Again, what I try to do when I'm planting trees and plants is I just try to do my research and find plants that don't have really devastating insect problems. So like in the case of pretty much all the pines seem to be in that category. So I have a really hard time picking a good pine. If it's just happens to be the absolute best choice, then I will choose it, but it's not in my top 100 choices, that's for sure. And same with the birches or even poplars, that sort of thing. It's very difficult to pick ones that are good, that are not going to just die after a few years. So, let's be sustainable, pick the right trees, ones that have low pest issues. The prunus family, all the flowering plums and that sort of thing, they're subject to the peachtree borer and also ambrosia beetle, which is a very tiny, tiny beetle. It's only like about a 1/16 of an inch long, maybe approaching an 1/8 of an inch, somewhere in there, maybe 3/16. Tiny, tiny little beetle, and man, they're a problem. And they get in by the thousands into trees and kill half the tree. And very hard to even just see the little holes that are produced. They're sometimes called shot hole borers because it looks like somebody might have shot it with a shotgun, because they have these tiny little holes and they're all perfectly round. But what a tough thing. When you do find that, you have to cut it out. But with fruit trees, particularly any of those single stone fruit trees, is if you're watering them all the time and don't allow the water stress to affect them, keeping them relatively watered properly throughout the season, then you don't get the ambrosia beetle as commonly. But when you start drying them out, and some people, they say, well, I've picked my fruit, so I'm just going to dry them out now. I'm not watering them anymore this year to save on water. But that water stress is what causes the tree stress. The tree gets stressed out. It gives off ethylene gas, which is a natural plant hormone, but it gives off that gas and it attracts the borers. So then the borers come in, they find the tree right away and they go, great, a tree under stress. And they multiply like crazy and they kill the tree. So, if you do have fruit trees, you got to care for them. You have to make sure that they're sprayed properly. You have to make sure they're watered and prune them carefully at the right times and the right ways, and you have great success. So that's basically it for today. Again, I do appreciate everybody tuning in today. Hopefully I've earned your subscription, and each week as we go along, I'm going to be adding new things. And one of the things we're going to be doing is doing a major overhaul of my vegetable garden this spring. And we're going to be doing some of it on time lapse and some of it at regular speed. But we're going to really get into the vegetable production program here and get my garden up and going. I've got a sizable garden, but it's, trying to keep up with it. In this industry, I'm so busy all the time that sometimes things fall off the fall off the edges as they're piling up, and I do my best to keep up with everything. But with this, I'm definitely going to involve some of my staff that are going to help me piece it together, get some time-lapse shots, get some good video, do some more teaching as we go along. But we'll get that garden cleaned up. We're going to do some renovations to it. We're going to add some raised beds. We have to prune some of the trees nearby to add more space and clean the whole thing up. And we do the no dig system. We'll be adding some cardboard into some of the beds and then adding fresh compost above that so that we can have some beautiful garden soil. And I bet we'll have a fabulous product. So that's it for today. Remember to check growercoach.com, and thanks again for tuning in to the Grower Coach Garden Show. Have a great week.